the cusp of transforming our government and restoring the greatness of this country. And we have a leader who I have known for 40 years. And I am privileged to call him a friend. We have a long association. And I thought as early as 1988, when I convinced him to speak at a luncheon in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, just in the run-up of the presidential primaries there, that he had the stature and the size and frankly the courage, not to mention the executive abilities, to be a great president. And he has, as had the country, been on an odyssey. There has been some change in his views. I think he's become more conservative over the years with the birth of his youngest son. He changed his views radically on the question of abortion, for example. I think that this election was unlike any other that I have been involved in. I was privileged to work as a young man for Richard Nixon. I consider him my mentor. He did many great things. He made mistakes, but we've had, all of our presidents have made mistakes. It is also been my privilege to work for Governor Ronald Reagan in 3 elections, 1976, 1980, 1984. But as excited and proud as I was of my role in Ronald Reagan's election, nothing could come as close to the improbability of this election. I say that because I think most folks don't realize that Hillary Clinton and her allies spent in excess of $2 billion. And that does not count the value of the round-the-clock negative coverage of Donald Trump on, say, CNN, which, had it been a paid commercial, which in essence it was, would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And on our side, we spent perhaps $275 to $278 million. So the disparity is extraordinary. We also know that not only was the mainstream media rigged against us, the CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, and sometimes even Fox continuum, but even in the so-called new media of the internet, as I was mentioning to my lunch companions here, Google would classify a press release from Donald Trump as a promotion. They would classify a press release from Hillary Clinton's campaign as an update. Just that designation is worth 6 to 10 million more opens on any given day. So having the old media rigged against us, the new media rigged against us, being massively outspent, and of course having the elite opinion, I'm sure you all heard this, Trump can't possibly win. Not a chance. Hillary's got this wrapped up. What are you doing? You're wasting your time. That mentality, that elitist attitude, given all of that, this is the most historic and exciting election that I have been involved in. Why did we win? I think we won for 2 real reasons. One of them has to do with the technological advance that we have experienced, meaning, for the first time, a majority of people are not getting their news from the television set in the living room. Now we're getting our news from a handheld device, a computer device, either a cell phone or an iPad, maybe even a computer. And that technological device means that television watchers now have to go through the internet to get to their programming. Well, once you got to the internet, it didn't take you very long to figure out, let's say you were a CNN watcher, that there are better things available. There are more accurate places to go, whether it's Breitbart or Infowars.com or Daily Caller or a dozen other places. So for the first time, you have the rise of vibrant, robust, alternative media. If you don't like what you're seeing on CBS, you've got someplace to go, someplace else to go. I think Donald Trump figured this out before anybody. And he really tailored his early campaign towards the alternative media where you had a growing constituency. Now, this is very important, they really seek to take this away from us. People don't realize this, but in 2016, President Obama signed an authorization, a defense authorization, that included in it essentially the creation of a national censorship board that decides what's fake news and what isn't, what shall be blocked on the internet and what isn't. And even today, we have a situation in which the giant internet providers like Google and Facebook, others, are using algorithms to limit our reach. It's an artificial system of trying to limit the number of people who see what a Donald Trump, for example, would post. They also brought in these third-party arbiters like Snopes.com. These are hardly unbiased entities to begin classifying anything that goes up on the net as real or fake. So for example, when the New York Times story can be looked at online, you see this yourself. It talks about Hillary Clinton's role in taking contributions to the Clinton Foundation and in return delivering control of 20% of our uranium output to a Russian company controlled by the Kremlin. In the bottom left, you'll see a little box that says this story is false. Well, sorry folks, that story's true. What was it they told us in Watergate? That no person is above the law. How many times do we hear it over and over and over again? What about Bill and Hillary and Chelsea? Are they above the law? Because the Clinton Foundation was not a charity. It's a slush fund for grifters. It was a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes, where public policy decisions in the Obama State Department, run by Hillary Clinton, could be purchased for the right amount of money. It is the most egregious corruption, perhaps, in American political history. Bill and Hillary are worth combined somewhere close to $500 million. What other of our presidents have gotten that kind of wealth in their post-presidency? Say what you like about Richard Nixon, he would take no honorariums, he would give no paid speeches, he would sit on no boards. He lived off his pension and the income from the books that he wrote. Contrast that with Bill Clinton, who was happy to work as a lobbyist for foreign governments against his own country. No, I think the American people made the right choice. But how could the pollsters have been so wrong? Because as active Republicans, you, like me, you heard it every day. This election was wrapped up, it was in the bag, and that Trump couldn't possibly win. I think the reason for that, in most cases, is an honest mistake, a miscalculation, meaning that many of the pollsters, particularly the ones who work for media, assumed from the beginning the electorate of this past election would look the same as it had 4 years ago. The same number of men and women and Christians and Jews and whites and blacks and Hispanics and so on. That the turnout model would be almost identical. And there was the fatal miscalculation, because to assume, for example, that Hillary Clinton would get the same percentage of the vote as Barack Obama in the African American community was an unrealistic expectation. Obama being an iconic, historic American figure. To assume that the overall African American turnout, for example, would be as great, well, that was a misnomer as well. It fell short. And those minor differences, combined with the fact that rural turnout was at the highest level ever, while urban turnout was down overall, allowed Donald Trump to slip through. And in the end, the fact that the Clinton campaign made a serious miscalculation, assuming that Michigan and Wisconsin were in the bag, they really underestimated Trump's rising potential in those states. They ignored them. They didn't spend money there. Hillary visited, I think, both of them once, I believe it is. And to his credit, Donald Trump recognized that those were available. And as I stress in my book, Making the President 2016, which I'll have available afterwards, there was a Herculean physical effort put forward by Trump in the last 2 weeks, where he was existing on 2 and 3 nights of sleep, 2 or 3 hours a night of sleep, and during the day hitting 4 and 5 campaign events in the Democratic strongholds of Wisconsin, in Michigan, and Western Pennsylvania, making a quick side trip to Ohio, making a quick side trip to Florida, make sure they were nailed down, because they were always necessary. And I compared this very much in the book to the close of the 1948 election. I think you'd have to say, in all fairness, that prior to the election of Donald Trump, the greatest single upset in American presidential history would have been the upset victory of President Harry Truman over Tom Dewey. And the situations are very analogous, really. The only difference was Harry used a train and Trump used a jet. But Truman, unwilling to accept the results of the pollsters who were telling him that he couldn't possibly win either, got on a train in Washington and headed west. And as he moved west, he was doing what they call now the whistle stop. And at each stop, he was getting bigger and bigger crowds. And as the crowds got bigger, Harry's rhetoric got less and less responsible and more vitriolic. The Republicans are putting a pitchfork in the back of every farmer in America, he said in Ohio. By the time he got to California, his crowds were massive. And of course, he would carry California, even though his running mate was the governor, even though Tom Dewey's running mate was the governor of California, Earl Warren, enormously popular. So this is, in my view, very analogous, because while, as I said, Truman used a train, Trump used a plane, Trump had to keep switching out pilots because the pilots are not allowed to fly that many hours in succession, a rule they don't have for candidates. And I'm convinced that superhuman effort at the end, where Trump realized that the old idea of one campaign event a day that gets great coverage for the evening news was now an outdated concept as well. The news cycle is now 24 hours. Because of the internet, there can be 5 different major political stories in a day, and therefore all of his events were getting wall-to-wall coverage. Now, some folks in the room will remember that old Tom Dewey, he had it in the bag too. They said, Tom, don't say anything of any consequence. You don't want to upset anybody. You want to keep everybody. He was busy in New York picking out his cabinet as Truman was making his way west. Well, in very much the same way, while Donald Trump was stomping in Democratic strongholds and breaking through, Hillary Clinton was in Chappaqua in her pajamas, looking at swatches of material for the curtains in her old office. The more I thought about it, the more Hillary was a lot like Tom Dewey. Cold, aloof, overconfident. In fact, in retrospect, Hillary Clinton was Tom Dewey without the mustache. Now, we have also experienced the first election in my lifetime in America in which the losers refused to concede. People have forgotten that in the immediate aftermath of the election, the argument of the Clintonistas was, well, she won the popular vote and therefore she should be president. Well, we don't select our presidents by the popular vote. You would think, having been through as many presidential campaigns as the Clintons have been through, they would know that, and that they would calibrate their strategy to a plan that would bring you 270 electoral votes. But they didn't, and Donald Trump did. Well then, and this is particularly interesting to me, I had written a piece for The Hill newspaper in Washington, D.C., in which I expressed a concern, which I still have, that these computerized voting machines are easily manipulated. They're just computers. Now, not manipulated from one central place globally. That would be, I think, what they call a conspiracy theory. No, but they can be manipulated on a local geographic basis very easily. And a number of studies where they have taken exit polls in a specific precinct or set of precincts and compared them to the results on the computerized machine have shown a very wide disparity, which would give one pause as to whether the machines can be rigged. I wrote the story really as or the piece, really as a warning that the Trump campaign had to look in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, for example, or in Detroit, or in Philadelphia, and the other Democratic big city machine counties where there's really only one party watching the process and where the computerized voter machines would be most susceptible to rigging. I was inundated with personal attacks about the ridiculousness of this theory, about how I was undermining confidence. You'll remember this, and how Donald Trump needed to say right now he would back the outcome of the election regardless of what happened, on the basis of no results. And I thought he handled it quite well, saying, well, I'd need to see it first before I could tell you. Now, this brings us to the recount. People have forgotten the recount, but Hillary Clinton, kind of with Jill Stein of the Green Party fronting for her, she asked for recounts in Wisconsin and in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. And in those systems, you are allowed a very limited amount of time to make the specifics of your complaint. Why is it that you think a recount is merited? And the answer from Hillary Clinton? Well, these computerized voting machines can be manipulated very easily. Who was it who wouldn't concede the outcome of the election? It's really extraordinary. And then, after those two gambits failed, the Electoral College argument, the recount turned up nothing. In fact, Trump gained votes in the limited recount that was done in two of those three states. Well, then the argument was, well, the intelligence services should brief the electors in the Electoral College on Russian influence and Russian interference in our election. Now, this is a subject that I am somewhat of an expert on, because on January 20th, the New York Times reported on page 1 in a story in which their print edition headline was, "Wiretapped Data Utilized in Probe of Trump Aides." And it names 3 people. I am one of them, saying that starting essentially in June of last year, that my email and my phone conversations and my text messages were being monitored because of my collusion with the Russians. I have never been to Russia. I have never spoken to anybody in the last 2 years from Russia. I have no contacts in Russia, but I do understand why this phony argument is being used to try to delegitimize and destabilize our president. See, the Democrats can't admit we nominated a lousy candidate who was out of energy, out of ideas, and epically corrupt. So therefore, there had to be some other factor. And, as we now know, the reason that they are so desperate to find some link between the Russian state and the Trump campaign, which I believe does not exist, is because that is the rationale, that is the legal justification they used to surveil Trump associates and aides at Trump Tower. The FBI director and the former NSA director testified under oath in the House Intelligence Committee that there was no surveillance at Trump Tower. That is a lie, and they call that perjury. That's why they're so desperate to prove this, because if they don't prove it, then what will become clear is that Trump and his aides were under surveillance for strictly political reasons. Folks, that's Watergate times 10. Because that's the utilization of government assets to spy on your political opponents. Which is why they won't drop this nonsensical charge that the Trump campaign was in touch with the Russians. Now, I turned on the TV 2 weeks ago now, probably almost 3, and I must tell you, there's nothing better than getting up in the morning and seeing a couple freshman Democratic congressmen kicking your testicles around like a football. No, I did not have advance notice of the WikiLeaks hacking of John Podesta's email. I have never said so. There is no evidence to that effect. Yes, I did predict in August, mid-August, that, as I put it, his time in the barrel would come, meaning that there would be an examination of his business activities. You see, they're right. There was a candidate for president who was in bed with Vladimir Putin. There was a candidate for president whose top aides were making millions and millions of dollars by doing business with the oligarchs associated with Putin. But that candidate was Hillary Clinton. And John and Tony Podesta, whether it's the bank deal or the gas deal or the uranium deal, they were lining their pockets. That is the genius of this strategy. Oh, Trump's in bed with the Russians. Don't look at us. Trump's in bed with the Russians. It was meant to distract, and it was successful, temporarily. Now, I have said to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees that I am anxious to testify as to this question, that I seek no immunity, that I don't need to be subpoenaed, but since they trashed me in public, I'd like to testify in public, not behind closed doors, because the charge that we were colluding with the Russians is false. The charge that I, as I said, knew about Podesta's email, well, even factchecks.org, which is financed by the Hindenburg Foundation, ran an analysis and found out that was untrue. And then lastly, the claim that I knew in advance about the WikiLeaks data dump about Hillary. Well, on July 31st, WikiLeaks said that in a tweet, that they would dump what they had on Hillary in October, which is what I predicted and turned out to be true. You now see why they can't drop this whole Russian argument. Susan Rice, and perhaps Valerie Jarrett, and it could go higher. These people have violated the law. They have used the intelligence assets and intelligence information to spy on the Republicans. My question is a simple one. What did the president know, and when did he know it? No person is above the law, and when is Barack Obama going to appear before a grand jury to answer questions on this matter? You may remember in Watergate, while the Senate Watergate hearings hurt the president, while the House impeachment hearings certainly hurt the president, it was the Watergate special prosecutor that sent people to jail. It's time for Attorney General Sessions to convene a grand jury and ask Susan Rice and Valerie Jarrett and Ben Rhodes and, yes, Barack Obama what they were doing. Yeah, the House Intelligence Committee should explore this Russian question. But while we're at it, let's explore what they were doing utilizing government assets to spy on Donald Trump. No, I think in the end, the American people will realize we had an honest election, that there was no collusion by the Russians, and the Democrats have to finally accept the results. Even today, they resist this. I can't watch Maxine Waters on TV without throwing a slipper at the screen. We are, I think, at the cusp of having a transformational president. Somebody who will return people's confidence in the government simply by applying common sense to government. I've negotiated, I don't know, multiple compensation agreements with Donald Trump, having worked on and off for him since 1981. And I can tell you, he is a man who is tight with a buck. That's the guy I want running the federal government. You see, because of the nature of his election, he doesn't owe any special interest, any industry, any special pleader. He really is his own man. And knowing him as I do, and having been close to him this many years, I'm almost amused by the puppeteers around him who think that you can put words in his mouth, or that you can put ideas in his head. See, I guess that works for your kind of conventional career politician. They work off of polling and focus groups and roundtables to try to find out what to say to be popular. That's not Donald Trump. In fact, in his presidential campaign for the nomination, he spent not a penny on polling, not a dollar. He operated strictly from his gut instinct. He speaks from the heart. Sometimes it doesn't always come out right, but he's not a polished phony. He's the real deal. He's genuine. And he has an approachability, a likability. He's fun to be with. And you could see this on the campaign. He was having fun. Contrast that with, say, Jeb Bush, who made it look like drudgery, or Hillary Clinton, who rather resented the fact that she had to campaign at all because she deserved this. It was hers. It was her turn. Trump, I think, gathered strength from the crowds, gathered strength from the people. And it is also how he developed his campaign themes. Meaning, take, for example, veterans health care, which may be the greatest disgrace in this country. Trump didn't learn this from a poll or from reading a newspaper story about it. He learned about it because everywhere he went in the country, people would approach him and say, "Oh, Mr. Trump, my brother's a veteran, my mother's a veteran, my uncle's a veteran. They're dying waiting for health care. The system's broken." He learned about this from the people, and then he incorporated it in his platform, in his remarks. This reminded me very much of Ronald Reagan, who I'm proud to have worked for. Reagan didn't tell his supporters about the Panama Canal. He learned about the Panama Canal from his supporters, and he incorporated it into his platform. So Trump is a natural in that sense. Now, we are off to a little bit of a rocky start. I would concede that, but I think it is explainable by the fact that our president is not a political creature. He has not been planning his entire life to have this job. In fact, I remember an interview with Oprah Winfrey probably 30 years ago where she said, "Donald, would you ever run for public office? Would you ever run for president?" He said, "No, I don't think so. Unless things get so bad that I have no choice." That's where we are today. And therefore, Richard Nixon, who had been in the House, in the Senate, and 8 years as vice president, getting to watch the presidency up close, knowing exactly how it worked, what the most important appointees were, where the pressure points in Washington were. Lyndon Johnson, the House, the Senate, vice president, had watched the system up close, knew exactly where the levers of power were. There is a learning curve. And the president has chosen around him some people, many people, who have the same lack of experience in federal government that he brings. And therefore, there is a learning curve. As your chairman pointed out to me, the stories in the beginning of the Clinton administration were exactly like this. Clinton, a governor from Arkansas, he had no idea how Washington worked at first. But at the end of the day, I think it is apparent with the attack in Syria, the idea that Donald Trump is in bed with Putin, well, I think that just went out the window. Why did he just kick Putin in the derriere if they are in bed together? So that gambit by the Democrats is deflating before our very eyes. And now with the dropping of the bomb in Afghanistan against ISIS, well, I think it's clear that the geopolitical reality has been visited upon the North Koreans, the Iranians, and the Chinese in the last 2 weeks. No longer do we have a president of the United States who will draw a line in the sand and sit back helplessly while our adversaries step over it. There's a new sheriff in town, and he is determined to follow the campaign platform that he laid out. My goodness, how rare that is in Washington. Somebody who's actually going to do what they said they were going to do. So he is going to restore Glass-Steagall, the banking regulations that Bill Clinton swept away, causing one of the greatest economic calamities in this country. He is going to cut the corporate tax rate. He is going to provide a Reagan-esque, a John Kennedy-based, across-the-board tax cut. He is going to rebuild the strength of our military. He is going to revitalize our economy. He is going to build that wall. He is going to seal our borders. He is going to follow through on everything he laid out. And it will be a bloody fight. Because the two-party duopoly, let's be candid, Trump's nomination was the hostile takeover of the Republican Party. The two-party duopoly working together, and I say this as someone who is a former Young Republican National Chairman, someone who has great reverence and sentimental attachment to the Republican Party. I will confess to you, I left the party briefly to become a libertarian. And now Donald Trump has brought me back to the party of my family, the party that I belong in. I am proud to be back in the new Republican Party. We are faced with an opposition in Washington that is entrenched and determined to thwart all of those changes I just outlined for you. Here's what they don't know about Donald Trump. He is the single most stubborn individual I have ever met in my life. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but when he fixes on a goal, he will not be deterred. He is tough, he's resilient, and he is determined to make America great again. So I enjoy the opportunity to be with you. I'm delighted that you all came out. The credit goes to you because it's a beautiful day and we could all be doing something else, but our country is at stake, and we have a leader who is capable of making the country great. He needs your support. Again, the single largest challenge I think we face is this attempt to crack down on the internet and silence the voices who made this victory possible. If Google and Facebook and the other enormous net-based companies, what we're calling the tech left, are successful in choking off access to alternatives to big media, well then the prospects for the president's re-election would be zero, and the chances of electing more Republicans at all levels will be diminished. This is the largest fight. And whether it is antitrust action by the Justice Department of Donald Trump against the Googles and the Facebooks, or whether it is a class action suit, this will not stand. They will not choke off our access, our First Amendment rights, and our right to free speech. If you look at my website, stonecoldtruth.com, you will see that our reposts, which were running in the thousands at the end of the election, and as recently as January, dropping off to the hundreds. Folks, this is artificial manipulation of the net. They're censoring us. It's Stalin-like censorship. It's the kind of censorship that Hitler had to employ. And that is what they seek to do now to shut down this movement. Watch this issue very carefully. Write the president, write your legislators, because without a free, vibrant, alternative media, we cannot win elections. We cannot win in Washington with a reform agenda. We have to keep the status quo. The status quo is very simple. All political points of view should have access to the net. Not just the left, all political points of view. With that, I'd be happy to take a few questions, and I'll ask the chairman to cut me off when it's time to go. A question from anybody? Yes, sir.
Mass